Imagine waking up one morning, checking your bank account like you always do, and wondering why your Social Security payment hasn't arrived. Within minutes, your phone starts buzzing. A friend tells you they heard benefits could be cut. A television commentator says the system is running out of money. Someone else insists checks are about to stop completely. Suddenly, you're left asking the same question millions of Americans are asking right now. What's actually happening, and how much of it is true? The problem is that when major Social Security news breaks, facts and rumors spread at almost the same speed. Headlines become more dramatic than the actual reports, social media fills with conflicting opinions, and before long, retirees are left feeling anxious without knowing what information they can actually trust. This week, however, two official developments have changed the conversation in ways every Social Security recipient should understand. One could shape the future of retirement benefits for years to come. The other could mean larger monthly checks in the future. But it also reveals a financial problem that many retirees are already experiencing today. If you depend on Social Security for even part of your retirement income, today's update deserves your full attention. This isn't about political talking points or internet rumors. It's about official government reports, newly released economic data, and what those numbers could realistically mean for the millions of Americans who rely on their monthly benefit to pay for groceries, medications, housing, insurance, and everyday living expenses. Over the next several minutes, we're going to separate the headlines from the facts, explain why experts are paying close attention to these new developments, and most importantly, discuss what they actually mean for you, not years from now, but beginning today. Before we dive in, take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week, government agencies release new reports, inflation data, Social Security updates, Medicare announcements, and retirement policy changes that can directly affect your finances. Unfortunately, many people don't hear about these changes until long after they've happened. My goal is to break down complicated government updates into plain English so you understand what's changing, why it matters, and what steps, if any, you should consider taking. Now, let's begin with the first major announcement, because this one quietly moved a timeline that experts have been watching for decades, and the shift was enough to spark immediate reactions from economists, policy analysts, and retirement organizations across the country. Earlier this week, the federal government released one of the most closely watched financial reports in the entire retirement system. Every year, financial experts responsible for overseeing Social Security publish a detailed assessment of the program's long-term finances. It's known as the Trustees Report, and while most Americans never read it, lawmakers, economists, financial planners, and retirement organizations pay extremely close attention because it offers the government's latest projections about the future of Social Security. This year's report delivered a message that immediately made headlines across Washington. Not because Social Security is disappearing tomorrow, but because one important deadline moved closer than expected. At first glance, the change might seem small. After all, we're talking about a shift measured in months rather than years. But in long-term financial planning, even a relatively small adjustment can carry significant meaning because it tells experts that the underlying financial trends are moving in the wrong direction rather than improving. Last year's projections estimated that the retirement trust fund's reserves would last until early 2033. The newest report now projects those reserves being depleted during the latter part of 2032. While that may not sound dramatic, it marks another step toward a financial milestone that policymakers have been trying to avoid for decades. More importantly, it means the window available for Congress to make gradual, less disruptive changes continues to shrink. Now, before anyone panics, it's incredibly important to understand what this report actually says and what it does not say. One of the biggest misconceptions repeated every time these reports are released is that Social Security is somehow running out of money. That phrase is misleading because it suggests benefits will suddenly disappear. According to the report, that's simply not how the system works. Even if the trust fund reserves were eventually exhausted under current projections, payroll taxes collected from millions of working Americans would continue flowing into the program every single day. Those ongoing tax collections would still finance a substantial portion of scheduled benefits. The issue isn't that Social Security suddenly stops paying retirees. The concern is that, without legislative action, incoming revenue alone would not be enough to cover every dollar currently promised under existing law. That's where the numbers become much more significant. Based on current projections, if lawmakers allowed the trust fund reserves to become depleted without making any changes beforehand, the program would only be able to pay a percentage of scheduled benefits using incoming payroll tax revenue. Financial experts estimate that this would translate into an across-the-board reduction affecting all beneficiaries under current law. It's important to emphasize that this is not a change happening today, next month, or even next year. It's a long-term projection based on current assumptions and current legislation. But because retirement planning often spans decades rather than months, these projections matter enormously to policymakers, financial planners, and millions of Americans preparing for retirement. This is exactly why so many retirement experts continue repeating the same message year after year. The sooner lawmakers act, the easier the solution becomes. Think of it like maintaining a home. If you repair a small roof leak when it first appears, the cost is usually manageable. But if that same leak is ignored for years, the damage spreads throughout the house, turning a relatively simple repair into a much larger and far more expensive project. Social Security operates in a similar way. Small adjustments made early can often be phased in gradually, giving workers and retirees time to adapt. Waiting until the financial deadline is only a few months away dramatically limits the available options and often forces much more difficult decisions. That's exactly why organizations representing retirees, economists, and bipartisan policy groups responded so quickly after this year's report was released. Their message wasn't that retirees should panic or expect immediate changes to their monthly checks. Instead, they emphasized that every year Congress waits reduces the number of gradual solutions available. Policymakers generally have several tools they can consider. They could adjust payroll tax rates, change the earnings cap subject to Social Security taxes, modify future benefit formulas for younger workers, gradually raise eligibility ages for future retirees, or use some combination of these approaches. Each proposal has supporters and critics, but they all share one thing in common. They become much more difficult to implement the longer action is delayed. For those of you already receiving Social Security, here's the most important takeaway. Nothing in this report changes the amount of your next payment. Your benefits aren't suddenly being reduced, your direct deposit isn't changing, and there is no new application or paperwork you need to complete because of this report. Unfortunately, every time these financial projections make headlines, scammers begin taking advantage of the confusion. Some call seniors pretending to represent the Social Security Administration. Others send fake emails claiming benefits are being suspended unless personal information is verified immediately. Remember this: the Social Security Administration will never call you unexpectedly demanding immediate payment, threatening to stop your benefits, or asking for sensitive personal information over the phone. Whenever major government news breaks, scammers often move faster than the government itself. If you're still working and haven't claimed Social Security yet, this report may influence how you think about retirement planning. One of the biggest decisions future retirees face is deciding when to begin claiming benefits. Some people choose to file as soon as they're eligible because they want income earlier. Others delay claiming because waiting generally increases the monthly benefit they eventually receive. There is no universal answer that's right for everyone, because health, family history, financial resources, life expectancy, and retirement goals all play important roles. This latest report doesn't suddenly change those factors, but it does add another piece of information to consider when discussing your retirement strategy with a financial professional. Now, while that first announcement understandably received a great deal of attention, another development this week may have an even more immediate impact on retirees' monthly budgets. Unlike the Trustees Report, which looks years into the future, this second update focuses on something many beneficiaries watch closely every single year: the annual cost of living adjustment, better known as the COLA. And if current economic trends continue, the adjustment for next year could end up being noticeably larger than the increase retirees received this year. Every October, the Social Security Administration announces whether benefits will increase for the following year. That increase isn't chosen randomly, and it isn't based on political negotiations. Instead, it's calculated using a specific measure of inflation collected during 3 important months of the year: July, August, and September. Those inflation readings determine whether monthly Social Security payments rise to help beneficiaries keep pace with increasing living costs. Because we're only partway through the year, the official number hasn't been calculated yet. However, economists closely monitor inflation data every month because it provides valuable clues about where the final adjustment may ultimately land. This week's inflation report caught the attention of analysts across the country because it suggested that price pressures remain stronger than many expected. Rising energy costs, higher utility bills, persistent food inflation, and continuing increases in several everyday household expenses all contributed to the latest numbers. As a result, several independent researchers who specialize in Social Security projections revised their preliminary COLA estimates upward. While these projections remain unofficial until the government completes its final calculation later this year, they indicate that retirees could receive a larger benefit increase than originally anticipated if inflation remains elevated through the summer. At first glance, hearing about a larger COLA sounds like unquestionably good news. After all, who wouldn't welcome a bigger monthly Social Security check? But this is where understanding the bigger economic picture becomes incredibly important. A larger COLA doesn't happen because the government simply decides to be more generous. It happens because the cost of everyday living has increased. In other words, higher inflation creates the larger adjustment in the first place. While receiving a bigger monthly payment certainly helps, it also reflects the reality that retirees are paying more for essentials like groceries, prescription medications, gasoline, electricity, housing, and healthcare than they were just a year earlier. That's why economists often describe the COLA as helping retirees keep up with inflation rather than getting ahead of it. To understand why this matters so much, imagine two different retirees living on fixed incomes. Both receive Social Security, both carefully budget every month, and both experience the same increase in their monthly benefits earlier this year. At first, they were relieved. The larger check felt like welcome news, but then reality slowly caught up with them. Grocery prices continued climbing. Prescription drug costs increased. Home insurance premiums rose again. Electricity bills became more expensive during the hottest months of the year, and even routine trips to the gas station started costing noticeably more. By the time they looked at their monthly budget again, they realized something frustrating. Even though their Social Security payment had increased, they somehow had less purchasing power than before. The extra money coming in wasn't enough to fully offset the higher prices they were paying almost everywhere else. This is one of the biggest financial challenges facing retirees today. Inflation doesn't affect every household equally. Government inflation indexes measure average price changes across the entire economy. But retirees often spend a much larger share of their income on healthcare, housing, prescription medications, utilities, and food than younger working households. If those categories happen to rise faster than the overall inflation rate, many seniors experience a real-world increase in expenses that's significantly higher than the official numbers suggest. That's why some retirees say they receive a cost of living adjustment every January, but still feel like they're falling behind by the middle of the year. Financial experts often describe this as the difference between receiving a larger check and maintaining purchasing power. They are not always the same thing. A benefit increase certainly helps, and nobody would argue that a higher payment is worse than a smaller one. But the real question is whether that increase allows retirees to buy the same amount of goods and services they purchased a year ago. If prices rise faster than benefits, purchasing power slowly erodes over time. It's not something most people notice after one trip to the grocery store. Instead, it happens gradually, month after month, until many retirees suddenly realize their monthly budget doesn't stretch nearly as far as it once did. Healthcare remains one of the biggest concerns. Medical costs often increase independently of broader inflation trends, and many retirees spend thousands of dollars each year on doctor visits, prescription medications, insurance premiums, and treatments that simply cannot be postponed. Unlike entertainment or discretionary spending, healthcare isn't something most seniors can easily cut back on. The same is true for housing expenses, utility bills, and basic groceries. These are necessities, not luxuries. So when inflation affects those essential categories, retirees often have very few options other than adjusting other parts of their budget or drawing more heavily from personal savings. This is why many financial planners encourage retirees to avoid making major spending decisions based solely on early COLA estimates. Until the official adjustment is announced later this year, projections remain exactly that, projections. Inflation can accelerate, stabilize, or slow down depending on economic conditions over the coming months. Energy prices, global markets, weather conditions affecting food production, and broader economic trends all influence the final calculation. While current estimates suggest next year's adjustment could be larger than the one retirees received this year, the final number won't be known until all of the required inflation data has been collected and officially calculated. That doesn't mean retirees should ignore the projections altogether. On the contrary, these early estimates provide valuable insight into the direction the economy is moving. If inflation remains elevated, retirees may want to begin reviewing their budgets now rather than waiting until the end of the year. Looking at recurring expenses, comparing insurance options, reviewing subscription services, evaluating prescription costs, and identifying areas where spending can be adjusted are all proactive steps that can help strengthen financial stability, regardless of what the final COLA turns out to be. The goal isn't to prepare for the worst. It's to avoid being caught off guard if everyday costs continue increasing faster than expected. Another important point that often gets overlooked is that Social Security is only one piece of retirement income for many households. Millions of retirees also rely on pensions, retirement savings, investment income, or part-time work. Inflation affects all of these income sources differently. Some pensions include automatic cost of living adjustments, while others remain fixed for life. Investment portfolios may perform well during certain periods, but experience volatility during others. Retirement account withdrawals depend on both market performance and personal spending needs. Understanding how these different sources work together becomes increasingly important during periods of higher inflation, because relying too heavily on any one source can create additional financial pressure over time. So when you combine this week's two major developments, a much clearer picture begins to emerge. On one hand, the long-term financial outlook for Social Security continues to present important challenges that lawmakers will eventually need to address. On the other hand, higher inflation is increasing the likelihood of a larger benefit adjustment next year, even as it continues placing additional pressure on retirees' monthly budgets today. These stories may appear unrelated at first glance, but together they highlight the same reality. Retirement planning is no longer something people can set aside and revisit once a year. Economic conditions, government reports, inflation trends, and policy discussions are changing more rapidly than many people realize, making it more important than ever to stay informed and understand how these developments could affect your own financial future.